and welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at PTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at the current political situation of the country with, of course, what is going on both in terms of the different political parties and, of course, the legalities that are involved with various political leaders. There is, of course, the big return that is still the talk of the town of Mr. Nawaz Sharif, the PMLN leader, something that was much anticipated. And then, of course, upon his return, there was a rally and a preparation also in place for the leader to address the public after a long gap. The PMLN has been banking on the Nawaz Sharif effect, so they call it, with what exactly is going to be the impact on the upcoming general elections and the party's, of course, chances in the matter. There are, of course, important concerns that are still there in terms of whether or not there will be a smooth journey in this particular regard or not, given the fact that there are still a lot of legalities involved with Mr. Nawaz Sharif, even though he had been able to gain bail in the Tosha Khana case before his address to the public. He's also surrendered to the Islamabad High Court. There's also been a restoration of his appeals in Al-Aziz and Field references. And so what exactly is going to be happening moving forward, especially given the suspension of his sentence, as well, is important in terms of how the PMLN is going to be taking this forward and the impact that this will have on other political parties as well. At the same time, we also know that according to the caretaker setup, we will be hearing a date of elections coming in from the ECP very soon. When exactly that's going to happen is still unclear. However, the expected time frame seems to be early next year. There is also the concern whether different political parties are in fact prepared for the elections or not, and really what is going to be the mandate or the narrative that is going to be presented, and of course to talk of a level playing field. There is also discussion in terms of who is it that the people are actually going to be banking on this time around as well, given the fact that there are contradicting opinions as to how much popularity or public support a certain party or a party leader actually enjoys. With, of course, the PTI's leadership still behind bars and the return of the PMLN leader, and then, of course, the impact of the PPP on the public, still something that is of concern. So we're going to be trying and taking a look at exactly what is going on and what sort of variables and nuances are involved in the coming days ahead, given our political situation, and then, of course, the important role that the institutions, including the military leadership and the judiciary, have to play in this regard. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi. We've also been joined online by political analyst and legal expert Mr. Muneeb Qadir, and the advocate Barrister Babar Imran, who's also joined us online. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being a part of the discussion and joining us in the debate tonight. Let me start with you, Muneeb. The discussion around, of course, what has happened so far is important, and a lot of it is circling around the return of Mr. Nawaz Sharif. And I want to understand, particularly in terms of both the political and legal context of his return, what exactly do you think is going on and what sort of impact it has? Whether or not the legal challenges of Mr. Nawaz Sharif are over, particularly in terms of the suspension of his sentence, the way that he's been granted bail and the way that his appeals have been restored. Are these problems at least far away for now, which is good enough for the party in terms of the upcoming elections? And secondly, do you think that his return so far has had the kind of impact that perhaps was anticipated by the party, especially in terms of his relevance to the society as we know it now?
Absolutely. I believe that on 21st October, when Mr. Nawaz Sharif addressed his supporters and the public at the Minar-e-Pakistan rally, the mood was very euphoric, particularly among the PMLN ranks and their followers and the supporters, and they felt that perhaps Mia Nawaz Sharif could now take off from where he had left in 2017, because a lot of them view that it was more of a political victimization that he faced, due to which he was ousted from power, from his position as the prime minister, and then eventually had to go into self-exile. So upon Mia Nawaz Sharif's return, there is this feeling amongst the most hardcore PMLN followers that he is going to somehow miraculously or magically restore Pakistan's economy, at least in the shape that it was in back in his day, which has only dwindled and gone downhill in the recent months and years. And there's also fresh energy and a lease of life that has been breathed into uh, the PMLN's campaigning with the return of Mian Nawaz Sharif. So it helps a lot that now he is getting a lot of relief. In fact, one after the other from the judicial process, and then of course under Section 4 and 10 of the Criminal Procedure Code, the provincial government has suspended Mian Nawaz Sharif's sentence, and he also got relief in the Tosha Khana case. And I think that he seems to be geared up for his electoral campaigning in full swing. So much so that at least his political rivals, particularly the PTI, but also Pakistan People's Party, are raising alarm and questions regarding this recent leniency that we've seen from the judiciary towards Mian Nawaz Sharif. So it means that he's really going from strength to strength as far as his chances at the upcoming elections are concerned.
All right. Ambassador Babar, I'd like to take your opinion also, especially in terms of the legal cases involved around Mr. Nawaz Sharif. At this point in time, of course, it seems that perhaps the way that he has to face the courts is perhaps delayed. But in a lot of conversations that we had earlier, also with legal experts before his return, it seems that there wasn't much that he has to actually face to begin with. Do you think that is the case, especially given the fact that he was actually convicted in 2 cases? There is, of course, the appeals that have been restored. There's also the suspension of his sentence by the Punjab government, and then, of course, his bail in Tosha Khana. And it seems that even though there are a number of cases surrounding him, it seems that everything is falling in place.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me. Firstly, it seems that the caretaker setup right now is actually engineered to save Mia Saab in a way that there is firstly really no concept by any interpretation of protective bail for a person who's convicted. Usually, it happens when a person is absconding and the trial has to begun. But in this case, there is a person who has been convicted and he has been given protective bail initially by the concerned court, and then when he appeared through that protective bail in front of the accountability judge then all of a sudden revoked his perpetual warrants of arrest. And then on top of that, the provincial government, now why do I say that the caretaker setup seems to be engineered in a way to save Nawaz Sharif? Because then under section 401 of CRPC, the provincial government has the power to suspend the sentence of a convict. And however, that has to be placed if the provincial government feel fit before the concerned court, which was not placed, and the sentence has been suspended. Now, my question here is that is the judicial system the same for everybody? There are so many convicts, there are millions of convicts in Pakistan. If I go under section 401 CRPC for any other convict to the provincial government of Punjab and ask for the same suspension, would that happen? The answer is a big no. So that is why I say that it seems that this all is being engineered for Nawaz Sharif.
Barrister Babar, can you please help us also understand Section 401 a bit more in more detail, especially in terms of in what aspects or what conditions is the suspension of a convict actually possible or even allowed by the government? Because I want to understand whether or not that criteria, whatever it is, has been met. I understand the procedure that you already mentioned that you think has been overstepped, but I want to know exactly who is allowed or what sort of conditions exist in terms of actually allowing a suspension of a sentence.
Well, as far as the statute is concerned, as far as section 401 is concerned, it doesn't state any specific conditions, but it states that if there are any conditions that the provincial government might think fit. Now, if you look at the whole scheme of this section, this is mostly for those convicts who have been there in the jail for a long period of time. Say their sentence is say 10 to 15 years, but after 7 years in the jail, he applies to the provincial government, and the provincial government says that, okay, we'll suspend the sentence and put conditions on him, usually in the West, that he will do some community service or things like that. But in this scenario, it seems that there are no conditions, and this law is actually being used for political purposes.
Right, sure, but Barrister Babar, you just said that there are no specific conditions and it could be anything that the government actually sort of understands or deems fit. And so that is very broad perhaps and a bit ambiguous also in terms of exactly what that might be. I want to then know, is it arbitrary in terms of the decision-making process as to who is given that suspension? Perhaps it is something that the Punjab government is deeming fit. Do they have to actually, are they accountable to somebody in explaining that this is why they suspended the sentence?
I think this is a very good question. Well, if I just read out 401 of CRPC, it says the provincial government may at any time, without conditions or upon any conditions. So that means that the provincial government has the power to suspend the sentence without any conditions. But usually there should be conditions, as I told you about the scheme, but in this case, there are no conditions.
But that means there hasn't been a violation of the Constitution, is what I want to understand. There's no violation here.
Well, I don't think there is any violation of the Constitution. However, any violation of CRPC, I think as far as the protective bail was concerned, I think that section for the first time in front of my eyes was used for a convict. But as far as section 401 is concerned, there is no violation.
All right, thanks for that. Farrukh, when we take a look at, especially in terms of how the suspension is also being viewed, and also in the past how the caretaker Prime Minister was questioned, and how perhaps a lot of media is also reporting, it seems there is a lot of responsibility being given or criticism being targeted towards the caretaker setup in terms of being impartial, being partial, and also being biased towards one party or the other, and especially in terms of the upcoming general elections, of how perhaps certain conditions are being created for one or the other. Do you think that this criticism is emerging from any fair standpoint in terms of how a caretaker setup is actually responsible for any action, or is there any act or any measure that has been taken by them that actually points towards this?
Right, Sana, thank you very much for the question and the opportunity. I think you were here yesterday as well. I don't know whether Barrister Saab was yesterday's program or not. But, you know, my main contention was also about optics, the way all these concessions suddenly appeared, right? But, and that is something that I keep on, you know, taking an issue with. But I am a firm believer in actually blaming the people who might be responsible, right? Rather than just throwing allegations around indifferently. My biggest concern right now is that who was giving concession and how it was being given. One, is you know, a court under any caretaker setup? When Mian Nawaz Sharif was actually landing in Pakistan, at that time a court had already given him concession. So should the court be held responsible or the caretaker setup? Similarly, when you talk about you know, biometric, at that time also it seemed that it was essentially courts which were involved. I'm not saying that the entirety of judiciary is actually to blame here, but there is a substantial part that was there. Similarly, when you talk about you know, caretaker setup, particularly in Punjab actually offering this kind of concession to Mian Nawaz Sharif, remember that you can blame the current caretaker setup, but it has not reinvented the wheel. It was PTI's government which had actually given Mian Nawaz Sharif permission to go out of the country. At that time, they had actually increased or added some conditionalities regarding monies, and then the matter went to court, and court actually suspended those conditionalities. So honestly, with due respect, when it comes to a caretaker setup, it is usually the easiest target because it doesn't intrinsically have its own political constituency, right? If you are going to criticize an elected prime minister, then of course you end up offending his supporters. But when it comes to a caretaker setup, they are the easiest target. So I think that one should lay the blame where it actually is. And I think our institutions keep on changing their mood. That is something that one has to actually contend with. But yesterday, when I threw that diatribe, Sana, when I actually very passionately spoke about or spoke against the two standards which are visible, one for the elite, one for the common man on the street. At that time, nobody approached me, but today somebody actually tried to convince me with arguments regarding the state of affairs in the country. And the argument that was given is that you can have absolute equity and equality, and that is something that we all should strive for. But there is a broader global context also. The country's economy, the donors or the investors that might be interested in investing in Pakistan, they are comfortable with certain people, right? SIFC is there, but of course the Arab world has to actually take interest in those issues. So you have to actually look at the entirety of the situation and then actually talk about it. So what I'm going to say is my entire life was spent in listening to this idea that the country is passing through a critical moment, right? And I understand that the country hasn't been this weak ever in the past. But if Mia Nawaz Sharif return through electoral process, and that is fair and free electoral process, it can bring some stability. I'm not against it. I don't personally dislike the man. I have excellent rapport with him, right? But my concern is that when you talk about all these matters, the optics, they become some kind of precedent, and that can come back to haunt you. That shouldn't be the case. 5 years ago, we had similar situation with another man. That man is now behind bars. And at that time, the man who was behind bars is now returning to the country and is deemed the next leader of the country. So this not learning from our own history is something that worries me.
Absolutely, and I'd like to explore that a bit further, Mr. Muneeb, with you as well, especially in terms of how, when we hear what the PML leader had to say, was perhaps positive, politically correct, and was hopeful in terms of bringing about peace and moving ahead, letting bygones be bygones. But I want to understand then whether or not, in terms of the way that we have seen the past, with the way we have seen different political parties, including the PMLN, move from an anti-establishment agenda to a pro-establishment agenda, and then also moving forward in ways where they talk about the civil military leadership being on one page, and then of course they have a different opinion when they're out of power. I want to then understand, given what is going on right now, a lot of the people are also looking at this in terms of a repeat of the same cycle. Do you think that there's any sort of instance or action that you can see or point towards as perhaps different and perhaps evident of a cycle breaker, of how fundamentally, given the way that the society is different right now, given the way the situations are different right now, that we can actually see this going somewhere that we haven't really seen before, and that there is possibly a chance, not just in terms of what the PMLN has to offer, but in terms of the political structure and the power of the institutions, with the way we've seen the parliament also oppose the judiciary, we've seen the judiciary stand up and talk about its own rights in a different way, and with the new military leadership in place as well. Or do you think it'll be more of the same?
So the thing is that a lot of people are saying that PMLN doesn't seem to have learned any lesson from their history, and they're again towing the line of what is otherwise known as the establishment. And also, yes, there's a sense of deja vu, meaning that, just the way that the coast had been set completely clear for the PTI chairman 5 years ago in the 2018 election. And it was Mia Nawaz Sharif who was at the receiving end of the wrath of all the institutions, and the judiciary now seems to have been reversed, and it's the PTI chairman in jail right now. and it's his party members who are now getting perpetual arrest warrants issued against them, and it's Mia Nawaz Sharif who is getting perpetual relief, so to speak, from the courts. But that's the thing, I believe that somebody in Mia Nawaz Sharif's position will have to work within the given framework, within the dynamics of what he has, and what he has right now is that I think he tested the waters before returning back to Pakistan 21st October, when just a few months ago he was saying that he wants revenge, in a manner of speaking, against those who had engineered his ouster from power back in the day in 2017. And now he's quite much changed his tune. He's now talking more about reconciliation and not basing his politics on vendetta, revenge, and moving forward, and even restoring relations with neighboring countries in the region, etc., etc. So all good things, all positive things, and of working in tandem with the military and taking them along on the same page, one of those phrases that we've heard a lot. So, I mean, this is what he has alluded to in his latest speech, Mia Nawaz Sharif. I suppose that in certain ways, the dynamics are exactly the same, that you have to toe the line in order to become an eligible candidate for leadership in any run up to the election. But at the same time, in certain aspects of the dynamics have also changed. Just a few days ago, we've seen Supreme Court giving a landmark judgment saying that military trials are not constitutional, and they've declared certain parts of the Army Act to be ultra vires the Constitution. Now, does that change the political landscape somehow or the other? Does that change the dynamics between military and civilian governments and politicians? That remains to be seen.
Right. Barrister Babar, the situation, if we talk about the fact that we've seen, of course, Mr. Nawaz Sharif leave the country on medical grounds and then return a number of years later. Irrespective of how different situations presented themselves and how, of course, the courts reacted, he was declared an absconder. And then I want to understand, given the fact that upon his return, we have seen perhaps the court also take a different direction. I want to understand exactly what is the procedure in terms of what judicial action is taken for somebody who actually is away from the country on medical grounds, is unable to present himself or herself in the hearings, and then is declared an absconder and then returns to the country a number of years later. What will be the judicial procedure for that, and exactly how is this move from declaring someone an absconder to them being given the restoration of their appeals or suspension of their sentence or bail? What sort of conditions or variables are taken into account when we look at this move? And also add to that, when we look at this particular situation in terms of the way the different political parties are involved and how there is talk of the upcoming general elections, how exactly do you see then the current judiciary under the leadership of the new Chief Justice move forward with what is being talked about much before in the past in terms of the time period or the consequence of those involved in holding the elections within a stipulated time? Because it seems now that everyone is awaiting a date, and the question of the Constitution in this matter or any violation of the Constitution in this matter is forgotten.
Right. So the first question is that once a convict is allowed to fly abroad for his medical treatment, well, in this case, he was allowed to travel abroad for a limited period of time. However, that limited period of time went all the way up to 4 years. Now, if there is any other convict, and when he comes back, if he doesn't come back, or if a convict doesn't come back, then he or she is pronounced as an absconder. And the moment they land into Pakistan or wherever they are arrested and they're taken before the court. This is the normal procedure. Now, in this situation, as we look at currently, that procedure is somehow, it's a very stringent procedure, and the courts take very, very strong notice of it, because there is a clear violation of the court order. The provincial government, the judiciary and the provincial government, both of them consented to it, that Nawaz Sharif should go abroad for medical treatment for a limited period of time. He didn't come back. And when that time was gone, any other person who would have come back to Pakistan after 4 years would be subjecting himself to wrath of the court. In this scenario, however, the all the provisions of the CRPC or all the criminal justice system was used in a way where all the relevant provisions were placed before the courts and the courts gave them relief. I think otherwise it seems that though there are no ifs and buts about it that these are
Yeah.
purely courts of law, but in Pakistan the courts of law at times probably have to take decisions which are political in nature. I think if you connect all the corners,
Hmm.
uh, right now
But
the Chief Justice
but
of Pakistan.
Barrister Babar, what I want to understand is that whatever assumptions or whatever inferences we may draw from certain decisions or actions by the court or any other body may exist or not, and one can have their own perspective on that. But I want to understand that those actions are still taken on certain grounds, right? In terms of whatever legal avenues are actually available. If, for example, a declared absconder returns and there is absolutely no legal ground on the basis of which they can actually get bail or any sort of relief, then I understand what you're saying. But I want to understand that there must be a certain ground that is available for the court to actually give that sort of relief, because in the case that it's not, how is it that they're able to make this decision and move forward? And if there is that legal ground and avenue involved, then what really is the difference that you're pointing out in Mr. Nawaz Sharif or any other person? Because if that legal ground actually does exist, then the court technically is able to do what it has done.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say here is that obviously, if you look at all our laws, there are numerous provisions, there are numerous sections which could be used one way or the other.
Yeah.
This trial or this bail, which has been given, is purely legal. There are no ifs and buts about it.
Okay.
But my point here is that if this was not Nawaz Sharif, and if this was, say, Jamaluddin, or if this was, say, anybody else, would they have been let go on the same grounds or not? That is the question. So I feel that probably there is a little inclination towards letting him go and get the elections, get the representatives being elected in time and get the things going on for it. The ECP has given January for it, and as far as the Chief Justice of Pakistan is concerned, he has been my teacher at one point, and knowing him, I think right now, whatever decisions that he will take would be for the benefit of the country. And as I see it now, we are slowly going towards election in Pakistan.
All right. Farrukh, I want to also understand your take on the issue when we talk about decisions. Of course, as Barrister Saab was also mentioning, the fact that there are different ways that a certain decision, of course, can be made, and what conclusion the courts actually come to. But I want to understand there's always this context of what is in the benefit of the country or what is in the interest of the country that is also being mentioned in terms of perhaps a reason or a basis of a certain decision making. And I want to then know, given the way that we view especially political decisions of political importance and political impact, is that variable of whether or not this is in the interest of the country not really being taken into account when we sort of criticize or only sort of broadly take a look at the situation in terms of how the law is different for someone like Mr. Nawaz Sharif and different for some ordinary person, or is it that we actually don't understand what are the different aspects involved when the court actually is making a decision?
Yeah. Now, Sana, I have to actually go back in past to actually give answer to your very cleverly designed question. When Imran Khan Sahab was actually ruling the country, at that time, the news started spreading Mian Nawaz Sharif, who was in jail, might have bad health, right? At that time, there was already this fear that he might actually suffer such as attack that it might be very difficult for anybody to justify. At that time, I went to Lahore. Chaudhry Sarwar was the governor at that time. People like me always have to actually keep on proving their loyalty to the system. At that time also, I was constantly being reminded that I might be actually a holdout from PMLN's side. So I had to actually go to Chaudhry Sarwar, and he was very kind to give me interview. At the end of interview, I asked him whether the rumors about Mian Nawaz Sharif are true or not, because I just wanted to understand. Imagine a leader who has considerable support and following in a tinderbox like Pakistan. If something bad were to happen to him, it would have created some very different kind of dynamic. Chaudhry Sarwar said, yes, he is really suffering and he is in bad shape. So I came back and I write this column. I mentioned this fact in my column. The next day, somehow, he was allowed to go out for treatment. Within a few days, it became clear that he wasn't actually seeking the kind of medical attention that was needed, and eventually he came back to, back to the jail. So I remember those concerns as well. I understand the concerns right now as well. And regarding what Barrister was saying about the Chief Justice of Pakistan, one of the reasons I can sleep at night comfortably is because of the moral leadership of the current Chief Justice of Pakistan. There are two kind of people, Sana. One who actually come to power and they suddenly are starched and they become inflexible. The other kind is the people who learn from other people's mistakes also. Our Chief Justice right now is that man, the latter man. And that is very impressive, the way he has been actually empowering dissent in the bench as well. Similarly, regarding security, the day this army chief came, this DJSA came, it became more comfortable because I knew that there isn't going to be any agreements or deals to be cut with TTP in a way that that is going to harm us. But my humble submission right now is that with all these great people around, somehow you have to actually manage the optics as well, because they create a kind of precedent. Another man that I actually kept on praising in the past, and that is Chief Election Commissioner. But remember, in the end, all the failures, whether the system is showing one man flexibility and inflexible for other or anything, it ends up, the buck stops with the Election Commission of Pakistan, right? And you have to realize that this moment it is actually the real government belongs to the Election Commission. The government that is there is just seat warmer. It might have some financial powers, but the actual power lies somewhere else. So I want to understand the calculus that might actually be responsible for what is happening. And this is why I'm saying that there must be umpteen reasons that the courts can see it, that the Election Commission can see it, that the Punjab government can see it, that I cannot see here. But the problem is, nobody is bothering to explain it to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Mr. Muneeb, the concern with different political parties and especially in terms of the political impact of incidences or actions such as the return of Mr. Nawaz Sharif is being questioned in terms of popularity. Again, something perhaps that we don't really know how to measure, but there is still a lot of concern and talk about who really still has more stronghold in terms of different areas, in terms of the public support and whatnot. And so I want to understand, given the major political parties of the country, including PTI, JUIF and others, and of course PPP and PMLN, what really is the current situation in terms of where the parties actually stand, in your opinion, especially now, of course, with the dynamic of Mr. Nawaz Sharif's return and the way that we've seen certain actions being taken in the past, and with elections just around the corner, hopefully, what exactly is the way that these parties actually enjoy public support?
I believe, and it's entirely my own subjective view, that currently PMLN is leading. Currently it's PMLN which is leading the race to the upcoming election. in terms of popularity and also in terms of legitimacy. And legitimacy is a very, I think, important keyword here, because PTI, which did boast of, being the most popular party, and perhaps it even was, has lost that legitimacy, especially after a 9th May incident and whatever happened in furtherance of, the PTI chairman's arrest on 9th May. So I think that they have been drowned out from the mainstream. So much so that just yesterday, some of the key members, some of the key female members of PTI have now joined the Calm Party. And that's what we are seeing, the whole dismantling of a political party which in the last election was the most popular. And Pakistan People's Party's major concern, among others, is that they want an election date. So they're very insistent that the ECP announce at what particular date the election is going to take place, because they think, or the feeling is that, the more time that you are giving, the more advantage the PMLN keeps on getting. With the amount of time lapse that there is between Mian Nawaz Sharif's return and the upcoming election. So they need a particular date at which it takes place. And also there's a feeling, as other panelists on this program have been mentioning, and quite rightly so, they're feeling that the courts and authorities and anything and everything that has got to do with law enforcement and the state apparatus all are now smiling at Mian Nawaz Sharif. They're opening all sorts of avenues and setting aside all roadblocks and obstacles that they were in his way to his election campaign and to the ultimate chances of succeeding at that election campaign. So given these dynamics, I feel that PMLN does indeed have a stronghold. I think that they've turned the narrative around, and despite a lot of criticism of their PDM government, which lasted for 16 months, Mian Nawaz Sharif's return has reinvigorated this spirit and the energy of PMLN and their campaign. And Mian Nawaz Sharif's narrative is now centered around the idea that the real PMLN was missing from the equation. So do not judge PMLN's leadership capabilities by reference to the PDM government, but a Nawaz Sharif-led PMLN government, which, if elected into power, is going to set all the wrongs right and is going to set the record straight and is going to take the country onto a path of economic recovery. Now, whether that happens, again, we've got to see that.
Right, absolutely. Barrister Babar, there is of course also concerns in terms of what exactly will transpire with the, of course, elections coming soon, and with the way the different political parties are going to act or not, and a lot of talk about a level playing field for different political parties. I want to understand that previously also we have seen that the judiciary has been criticized a lot in terms of the political biasness perhaps, or the way that the benches were formed, and of course the previous Chief Justice was also criticized largely on that. I understand that aspect of course has been ruled on differently by the current CJP, which is a positive sign. But in terms of, for example, the cases against Mr. Nawaz Sharif or other political parties involved, how much of an impact will the way that the public actually looks at these political leaders, the way that we have public opinion going around, or the way that different political parties are enjoying the support of not just the public, but in terms of legitimacy, as Mr. Muneeb was talking about, and what the situation of the country actually demands in the best interest of the country. How much of all of these factors actually impact the decision-making process of cases such as that Mr. Nawaz Sharif is facing?
I think on the whole, the judiciary has to have a very neutral role, and they have more or less kept that neutral role. If you look at all the precedents or all the previous judgments, I don't think they were influenced by the political parties, though there is a tinge of influence by the establishment as a whole. But the establishment, because they have to run the country, and the democracy has to run in a particular way. So probably that influence might be there, but every day in the courts, I don't see judges' inclination towards one particular party at all. I think whoever wins the coming election and the cases
Yeah.
after that,
You know,
the judges.
yeah, I understand. I actually understand, Barrister Babar, that that's how it should be, of course, and maybe I'm completely off track here, but of course there are human beings involved, and there of course there's baggage, there's a lot of influence that is still coming in, and perhaps absolute objectivity is not really something that perhaps exists. I don't know how much of the way that the system or the constitution itself actually ensures that that is eliminated, but do you think that there's still perhaps cracks that unfortunately get seeped into?
I think, just to answer that question, I'll give you two precedents. Number one, since the time the current Chief Justice of Pakistan has taken the oath, if you look at the historical or his history as a judge, in the PTI government there was a reference against him, but so far he has been there for 2-3 months now, or probably more than that. There is no particular decision against PTI yet. The same way, if you look at Peshawar High Court, all the PTI leaders are getting reliefs from the court. So right now, then again, if you look at PMLN, it's getting relief from the court. So I think it is not politically inclined really. It's more about the law that matters. They are looking at rights of everybody.
Right. Thank you very much, Barrister Babar, and thank you very much, Mr. Muneeb, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. And Farrukh, before we go, I want to talk a little bit more about what we had a chat about after the show yesterday, because I still was thinking about the level playing field and the analogy of a very strange football field that you gave me. And I want to understand how exactly, again, if for our viewers you could also explain, how exactly is it that we are able to then make it a level playing field, and who actually does that, and how do we get to that point when it is all strange and up and down in places?
Right. I'm sure that you will land me in some kind of trouble. I told you that during PTI's time I was considered a PMLN's holdover. And similarly, when recent coalition came, I was considered PTI's holdover. Before that, PMLN used to consider me a People's Party holdover, and the People's Party had to actually accuse me that I'm establishment's plant. So I have lived with all kind of accusations, and that actually puts me in very difficult position.
So you won't get into trouble, because you've seen it all.
No, I think that I am already in too much trouble as it is. But no, I'm not talking about my career. I'm just talking about life in general. But right now, what I wanted to point out is, yesterday you kept on asking me and other panelists, why do we need a level playing field? So I gave you an example of a football court that is slanted right to one side, that no matter how much effort you put in to throw the ball in the other side's goal, it comes back, rolls back to your goal, and you automatically the opposite side actually scores a goal. That is something that you have to bear in mind. You have to have some kind of minimalistic equity and equality. Why do I say equity? Because equity, when you cannot ensure equality, there has to be some measure of justice involved, right? My humble submission is that somehow Pakistan has actually created a kind of decentralization of power. There are many people actually sitting in the middle. When you talk about the executive, there are small pockets of control. Similarly, when you talk about judiciary, we just spoke about Chief Justice of Pakistan, but there are other people, right? And then there are layers of judiciary. The first tier is the federal one that we keep on talking about. Then there is provincial, and then there are local. So what we do is we give people too much power, but we don't give them the kind of buffer that is needed to ensure that they are not influenced. In the end, what happens is that people very easily get influenced, and that is not merely based on establishment's way of controlling or somebody else's. Even rich people have great influence. For example, you had Al-Qadir Trust case repeatedly being mentioned on television. What was happening? Most of the channels were not talking about the business party that was involved, right? that kind of money also has influence. So what you have to do is ensure that there is some semblance of equity and equality, Sana, and that you do something that state doesn't actually create inequality per se. So that is my concern regarding what, very quickly, one more line. What Barrister Sahab was saying, that establishment perhaps it has to rule, control the country or run the country. So I kept on asking various stakeholders during previous time, who rules Pakistan? Everybody kept on saying, we don't rule the country, we don't control it. In the end, a foreigner friend was sitting next to me. He says, it is clear nobody runs Pakistan. So it is just, willy-nilly moving on.
All right. Well, we hope that it's going in the right direction, at least whoever's running it. But that's all we have from the debate. Thank you, Farrukh, and thank you for being part of the debate as always. We'll now see you tomorrow.